but the idea is just to capture a feeling or an idea. So with this pose, I'm really feeling kind of like this S curve going through her body. Sometimes you'll see like a general arc. Other times it is more of like an S curve. So that's the main thing, is you're trying to capture an attitude. And a lot of attitude is discovered through the way we move our bodies and the way we position them. Yep. So yeah, anytime you can find, little areas where you can push and pull the pose, it tends to give it a lot more life. And the more experience you get with gesture drawing, the more you know where to push things, right? So I'm going to kind of keep that head going in that same direction as the S, kind of complete the S curve. Okay, and then just kind of do quick little poses for these first ones. And like I said, I have an illustration background, so my temptation is always to like get into the little details and spend a lot of time because I want to make it beautiful. I want to make, artwork. And sometimes, there's obviously a place for that, but other times you really just want to kind of capture a feeling. And so you don't want to get too bogged down. All right. I'm going to kind of move on to the next pose here. Okay, so it's another one that's got a nice sort of energy to it. I'm kind of sensing more of just like an arc coming through here. Another thing I'm thinking about as I'm constructing my figures is the tilt in the hips and the shoulders. So sometimes they're going the same way. Other times you've got kind of that contrapposto. In this case, I'm noticing the hips are kind of shifted this way. The shoulders are shifted the other way. And that kind of creates a nice splaying pattern, which you see a lot in nature. So it's really pleasing for our eyes. Okay. I'm trying not to worry too much about anatomy. It's kind of interesting. There's sort of this tension between anatomy and storytelling. And in my mind, the difference between gesture drawing and figure drawing is that gesture drawing, you're really trying to capture a moment in storytelling. Whereas figure drawing, you have a little more time to just focus on the technique or the execution, and not quite as much emphasis on the story. And so there's always sort of this tension between the two, and the goal is to try to merge them as much as possible. You're trying to execute with solid anatomy while also conveying a clear story. And so honestly, I just give myself permission to focus on one for a time and then shift to the other. So I'll focus on anatomy for a few months and kind of let storytelling take a backseat until I really feel like I've fortified that area. And then I'll shift back to more storytelling. And then they kind of inform each other. So the more you focus on one, the next time you shift over to the other, you're a lot stronger for it, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't worry or put too much stress on or too much pressure on yourself if you feel like, oh, my anatomy is really suffering as I'm learning about how to do gesture drawing, because that's, at least in my experience, that's been very normal. Okay, let's see. Again, I'm going to try to kind of keep this head in line. Also, when I talk more, my gestures tend to suffer a little bit. So hope you all bear with me. Okay. Okay, we'll kind of move on to the next one. All right. Got some nice overlapping here, some foreshortening. Let's see. So this one, I'll go a little bit into story here. So the best way to inform your gesture or your story, or sorry, to inform your drawing and your gesture is to know what your story is. So if you don't have a clear story in mind, it's hard to know which ways to push your gesture. And so in this case, I'm thinking, she's gripping her back in pain. And that can change some of the details. And with gesture drawing, you want your drawing, everything in your drawing to support that storytelling if possible. And so let's see. A little tricky at this angle. I'm going to try to show her expression. She's just hurt her back. Let's see that. So she's gripping her back. I'm showing her fingers kind of like coming up. It seems like when you're in pain, everything kind of like curls up. And so that's something that I'm trying to show here. I'm sorry, one second. I'm going to shift her wrist to be like kind of grabbing her leg a little bit. Her knees kind of coming together. So everything in my pose is kind of informed by that story. Some hair coming down. Feels a little frazzled. Maybe one foot is kind of like pointed inward. These are all kind of details that like you'll just kind of have to discover as you're drawing your doing your pose. So anyways, it's something that I'm thinking about. All right, we can kind of move on to another one. If anybody has questions, feel free to pop in and ask in the chat. Okay. So let's see. Another thing I'm thinking about with construction is breaking it down into really basic shapes like cylinders and cones. And this is really useful when, especially when you're doing draped figures, because the figure can really get lost underneath all the folds and the big shapes. And so it's really important to understand the figure first, and then move into more draped studies. Obviously, you can do both at the same time, but just making sure that you're not hiding behind, and I'm guilty of this myself, but hiding behind, just the big shapes. So something I like to do is really break things down in terms of just like these really simple basic shapes. It also helps with perspective. So you draw something like this, it's coming toward you, right? Kind of coming out toward you versus the other way, right? So this thing is kind of going back in space a little bit. And so breaking down things like hands and heads is a lot more, this seems a lot less daunting when you break it down into basic shapes, because you're not thinking, oh, this is a leg with really complex systems and muscles. It's just a box, right? And so I'm going to kind of emphasize that line of action there. Yeah, the torso and hips can be kind of complicated, but I find that this is a nice practice. Let's see. Very hopefully looking up. Something that I've learned in school, I had an amazing professor, Sam Nilsson, and a lot of his his concepts had to do with this idea of a story, right? But he always encouraged us to find a verb and an adverb to describe the story. So not only like a noun, like, oh, it's a girl sitting, right? You can get a lot more emotion out of a pose if you're thinking how they're doing it. So she's sitting, or she's looking up very hopefully, and that gives a lot more specificity to your drawing. And sometimes it's tricky. Honestly, there are times when I feel like I just need a bigger vocabulary. Like I can't even describe what I'm trying to draw here. I can just feel it, which is useful too. But sometimes I wish I had words to describe how what I'm trying to draw, if that makes sense. So currently trying to read more to increase my vocabulary. Maybe that little bit of a furrowed brow with a smile to show hopefulness. Let's see. I kind of forgot that I was doing the basic shapes. Anyway, so that's kind of a nice exercise. All right. This one. Another thing I really like to do is think in terms of like a bean and like long tapering shapes. Like bean and noodle is an exercise that kind of a classic exercise, or like the flour sack. So in this case, there's kind of the straighter side on her stomach, and then toward her back, you see it's squashing a little bit. So you get that line of action through there. And then the noodle is basically just forget about anatomy for a second. And I really love this exercise because it helps you to just strip it down to its most basic movement. And you're not worrying about anatomy. Again, it's just an exercise. And you can kind of switch between whatever exercise feels the most useful at the time. It looked kind of funny, but maybe she's cold and she's wearing a jacket. That's something with gesture drawing that honestly just takes a lot of practice, is that you have to know the figure well enough to change things. Oh, sorry. Somebody just said they're taking a gesture drawing course with Sam right now. That's awesome. He's seriously amazing. Take advantage of every moment you get with in his classes. They're so good. Okay, wait, what was I saying? You remember what I was saying? I forget. You have to be familiar enough with the figure to change the pose if the story needs it. And so over time, you'll understand anatomy enough to be able to kind of draw the leg or the arm from any angle. Yes, thank you, B. Okay. Let's see, obviously that foot's a little weird, but anyways, the idea there is to just like loosen up and try to think about where the direction of the limbs, basically. Okay, nice stretch pose.